Hello friends. If you asked your friends what ship is considered the most famous in history, the answer in most cases would be one. Of course, this is the legendary Titanic. Its history is shrouded in a flare of mystery. It is first the cause of great hopes, national pride and triumph of human thought, then the source of sadness and grief, the degree of which is simply impossible to describe in words. The day when the Titanic quickly sank will forever remain one of the saddest days in the history of mankind. And although more than 100 years have passed since the tragic event, nothing is forgotten, and the interest in the liner does not seem to fade. Today we will tell you some facts about the Titanic that can really amaze you. They could have saved everyone on April 14, 1912. At 23.40, the Titanic collided with an iceberg, receiving fatal damage. A couple of hours later, at 2.20, it broke into two parts, after which, in a matter of minutes, it was completely submerged. All this time, the ship was sending distress signals that remained unnoticed. The Carpathian steamer was in a hurry to the crash site at maximum speed, but alas, it arrived only an hour and a half later. All that was left for the crew was to pick up 710 miraculously survived people. But everything could have been completely different. It was only after a while that it became known that the Carpathian steamer was not the closest ship to the Titanic. Approximately at 0.45, that is, the night of the terrible night, the officers of the Titanic noticed the fire of someone else's ship in the distance. It was a California passenger steamer, but it did not respond to distress signals. The captain of the sinking ship desperately tried to attract attention, launching white signal rockets. It will seem amazing to you, but the officers from California noticed each of these rockets. The crew immediately woke up the captain, but alas, he did not pay any attention to what had happened. The only radio operator who could receive a distress signal at this time slept soundly. In California, it was decided that the rockets were just a distress signal. It was not until the night of the terrible night that it became known to the crew that the Titanic was not the closest ship to the Titanic. It was not until the night of the terrible night that it became known to the crew that the Titanic was not the closest ship to the Titanic. Today, experts agree that the Californian could have saved many, even almost all the lives that were lost that night. There were more than 1,500 of them. No one knows all the victims, of course. Every world-scale tragedy is accompanied by a huge number of complex and very thorough investigations. If you look at the official figures, it turns out that the victims of the shipwreck were 14 people. However, in fact, everything is much more complicated. The exact number of victims is unknown. There may be both 1490 and 1635. Moreover, the investigations did not help much. Until now, no one can name all the names of the people who sank on the Titanic. When the bodies were lifted from the bottom of the ocean, it turned out that many passengers traveled under someone else's name. In addition, there were too many people. They were all from different places. The lists of survivors were in panic and fuss. It is not surprising that it was impossible to identify each person. In the Canadian city of Halifax, New Scotland, there is the Fairview Cemetery. More than 100 victims of the Titanic rest here. About 30 of them never got their names. Surprisingly, the investigations are still underway. In 2008, for example, one of these graves finally got its name. Extensive DNA tests and a worldwide genealogical search helped to identify the body of a 19-month-old baby. The nameless remains, 96 years later, regained their name. Sydney Leslie Goodwin. Too few boats when it comes to any means of transport. Great attention is paid to the safety of passengers. Engineers and designers do everything possible to save as many people as possible in case of a crash. But something went wrong with the Titanic, and very much. When the legendary passenger ship was launched, it was the largest ship in the world. In total, it could accommodate 3,547 people. Just think about how huge this number is. Fortunately, when the Titanic set off on its first journey, there were still fewer people on board. According to official data, 2,224 passengers were registered. And now, we move on to the most interesting. According to the original plan, the Titanic was supposed to take 48 lifeboats with it. Nevertheless, the owners of the liner insisted that their number be reduced to 20. The capacity of each lifeboat was approximately 60 people. Let's do a simple mathematical calculation. And it turns out that only 1,200 people could be saved. Just a little more than half of the passengers. Why couldn't they install more lifeboats? The official reason is this. They would take up too much space on the deck, interfere with walking, and cover a beautiful view of the ocean. This is how stupid aesthetics and convenience were placed above the safety of people. It is worth noting for the sake of fairness. The ship was considered unsinkable. No one expected that it could go to the bottom at all. In addition, everyone thought that even with the damage, the Titanic would be able to stay afloat for a long time. That is, the immediate and simultaneous evacuation of all passengers was not considered as a possible option for the development of events. The exercises were canceled. There is such a concept as a boating exercise. First of all, the crew in practice hones the skills of preparing boats, their descent into the water management. Secondly, passengers are prepared for a possible evacuation. They learn to evacuate in a calm environment. Well, in the case of an emergency, they better understand how to behave and panic less. Ideally, boating exercises are held once a week. The Titanic set off on a journey on April 10th, so there is nothing surprising in the fact that the exercises were scheduled for April 14th. Only for some mysterious reason they were canceled. To this day, no one knows why Captain Smith decided not to hold them. Maybe he was too self-confident? Or did he think that there were only 3 days left to sail? In any case, this decision cost people their lives. Passengers, as well as the crew, were not ready for an emergency evacuation. The boats, designed for 60 people, in some cases sailed, filled only half. The musicians played to the end. Despite the fact that the Titanic was amazing in its size and capacity, it also surprised with its interior. Luxuriously furnished salons, reading, smoking, and gymnastics halls. All this was provided for the services of rich, first-class passengers. Among the crew, there were a large number of cooks, waiters, bakers, and, of course, there were hired musicians. 8 people. Then there is a quote from a second-class passenger who was lucky enough to escape from the Titanic. That night, a lot of brave actions were made. However, all of them fade compared to the actions of men who played minute by minute while the ship sank deeper and deeper into the water. Despite the fear, fuss, and incredible panic, despite the understanding that there was not much time left to live, these brave people held instruments in their hands and continued to play. Until the very end. Until the last second. They knew that music calms people down, makes the tragedy less terrible, so they could not stop. None of the 8 musicians survived. Only 3 bodies were found. The youngest of them was only 21 years old. The Titanic could be saved. David Blair is a man who was born under a lucky star. On the Titanic, he was supposed to be the second assistant to the captain, but almost in the very last second, he was removed from the flight. This incident saved his life, and he was probably incredibly happy. But something clouded his joy, because, perhaps, he was the only person who could save the Titanic. How? 100 years ago, ships were not equipped with smart advanced technology, like today. To notice the threat on the horizon, people had to look both ways. Binoculars helped a lot in this matter. But here's the catch. The Titanic crew did not have access to the locker where the binoculars were stored. David Blair was responsible for the keys. Leaving the ship before departure, in a hurry, he simply forgot to give this key to his successor. He stayed in his pocket. If the crew had access to the binoculars, they would have noticed the iceberg in advance. The ship would have time to change course. Everything would have worked out. Hundreds of people would have survived. But the Titanic seemed to attract failures, a series of stupid coincidences and mistakes that led to a disaster, and an evil curse over it. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, White Star Line was considered the largest British shipping company in the world. In 1907, its owners decided to build the 3 largest liners in the world. As you may have guessed, one of them was the Titanic. Its first brother was named the Olympic. and the second was the Gigantic, which was later renamed the Britannic. No matter how huge and luxurious these amazing ships were, each of them awaited not the happiest fate. These three are rightly considered the most famous ships in history. They are dedicated to many books and films. But there is something that unites them. Or, to be more precise, someone. This is Violet Constance Jessup, a native of Argentina, a simple stewardess who received the title of Miss Unsinkable. When on September 20th, 1911, the Olympics collided with the Hawk cruiser, the accident, fortunately, was without casualties. Violet was then on board the liner. When the Titanic collided with the iceberg, she was on board too. By chance, she managed to take a seat in the lifeboat. And finally, during the First World War, Violet served as a nurse in the British Red Cross. To serve, she was sent on board the Britannic, which then served as a hospital ship. On November 21st, 1916, the Giant exploded on the mine. However, Violet managed to survive this incident too. Do you understand now why Miss Unsinkable? By the way, initially, the girl did not want to work on the White Star Line, and at the service on the Titanic, her friends persuaded her at all, advising her that in the future, if you like this work, it will be a great recommendation. We do not know whether to consider Violet Constance Jessup successful or, on the contrary, unsuccessful. Let's just say that a series of such incidents looks a little mystical. The engineers did not survive. Today we have already talked about the fact that there was a huge number of crew at the end. We will dwell on this fact in a little more detail. And at the same time, we will pay tribute to the people who did everything possible to save others. About 900 crew members were transported by the Titanic. Out of this number, less than a third remained alive. Among them, not a single engineer. All because these people simply had no time to save their lives. 25 engineers, 6 electricians, 2 boiler workers, a water conductor, and a clerk. While panic reigned on the deck, and the air was saturated with common fear, they remained at the bottom in the boiler rooms. It was necessary to support their work so that there was electricity left, so that the pumps continued to pump water. The struggle not for life, but for death took place almost every centimeter. The technicians did not want to give up just like that. And even more likely, most of them did not understand that they were only postponing the disaster. It will no longer be possible to prevent it. However, all the same, these people are an example of courage and dedication to their cause. In the city of Southampton, on the southern coast of Great Britain, they deserve a monument. That's all for today, friends. See you soon.